Yeah, great to see everybody, and I'm really delighted to be able to talk to you a little bit about our AI journey at King. So I'm going to get straight into it. Got quite a bit of content, and I'd like to leave some time for questions. You might be aware that the mobile game industry is pretty large, but just wanted to set some context for you. It's the largest portion of the gaming industry, around about 53% overall of games today. The gaming industry itself is worth coming up to $190 billion worldwide, which is quite extraordinary, and mobile is more than half of that. I mean, it started way back in smartphones and Snake and lots of very simple games to the sophisticated, nearly console-quality games we have today. King's journey started quite some time ago. So the company is 20 years old this year, and Candy Crush was released just over 11 years ago. And we started out creating skill-based games on browsers, and very quickly pivoted to releasing games on Facebook. So the growth of the company was very much in parallel with Facebook's meteoric growth. Some of our earlier titles on that platform include Bubble Witch and Pet Rescue and things like that. And around about this time, we introduced what we call the Saga progression mechanic, which I'll talk about in a second. Candy itself was launched in 2012 as the whole mobile ecosystem was exploding around the app stores and the iPhones and things like that. And since 2012, Candy has just grown and grown and grown and been quite an incredible project and entertainment franchise to be part of. It's grown successfully for 24 quarters in the US. It's been top US franchise in the US for 24 quarters in a row. A little bit more about Candy. Hopefully some of you here will have played Candy and experienced it. We got some fun stats here. It was launched in 2012 and it now has over 15,000 levels. If you know Candy, you know at its core it's a very simple puzzle switcher game where you complete sort of matches to progress through the level. So we have 15,000 levels. We have many thousands of players who have played all the way through our game and are waiting for the next drop of content. Every week we drop more levels, another set of episodes for our players, and that becomes their weekly routine, which is really incredible. Levels and level content are at the core of our business, and it's going to be a topic for AI in a few minutes. We've also had over 5 billion downloads of the Candy franchise, and right now we've got over 238 million monthly active users across our games. And there's something like 5 trillion levels have been completed. Can you believe it? What is Candy? Candy is at its heart a very simple game. It's a puzzle casual title on mobile. It's free to play, so there's absolutely no requirement to pay to play Candy. It does, of course, have an economy behind it. We are a commercial company, and there are two ways that we generate revenue. One is where some players, some small fraction of players, choose to pay to get boosters and lives and progress faster. And then another portion of our players watch ads embedded in the game, and these are opted-in ads, so you absolutely do not ever get an ad if you don't ask for it specifically. And in return for watching an ad, you get rewarded with boosters and extra lives so you can progress. And that's our job, is essentially balance the game experience for all these different types of players. And right at the core we have our switcher, which is the simple, essentially, match-3 puzzle game. Around that we've built the idea of a narrative, a progression over time, so that players get a sense of achievement. And also it gives us a way to tell a story, to bring players on somewhat of an emotional journey. It's not just that the levels increasingly get hard. We're trying to create fun and excitement for players so that they really feel engaged with the game. And then a third way we think about these games is as an entertainment platform in and of itself. So we've loads of players in Candy, and they come to play the game clearly, but also some players come to compete with their friends to set up guilds. Some players are very competitive oriented, and they want to achieve high rankings in competitions. Other players are very much interested in a solo experience. They've just got a couple of minutes in their daily lives and they want to just zone out and get some delight and some fun. And then we've got players who are very social, just want to share with their friends and their community and build sort of small communities around the Candy game. And we're trying to allow all of those different types of players to interact and to experience the game in the way that they choose. So it becomes very much an entertainment platform, more so than a simple puzzle game. And just to give you an idea of the complexity of some of these things that we do inside of Candy as a platform, we have increasingly been running competitions to try and find the #1 Candy player We started out in the UK, then expanded to the US, and last year we had the first global candy competition to try and find the top candy player around the world. And it's just such a fun thing to do, to have millions and millions and millions of players competing for a cash prize, all the way boiling down to the 10 top players who then we invited back to our London HQ and just had this wonderful fun event with those 10 players. That requires a huge amount of coordination, quite a high investment in technology, as you'd imagine, and then quite a lot of work around branding and co-branding and working with partners to bring those players into that competitive environment and get them to have fun. So it's way more than just matching 3 candies in a game. So that just gives you a sense for how we think about candy as a platform, as a technology and an entertainment experience. I want to give you a sense for how we intersect AI into that and how we've been using increasingly AI to create, to operate, and to optimize that candy business. We're going to start by going back in time a little bit. AI in games have had a very interwoven experience. AI has been arguably present in the very earliest games. It might be stretching a point to say that Pac-Man has AI in it, but it has rule-based characters, non-player characters, NPCs, Inky, Blinky, Pinky, and Clyde. And they're the 4 ghosts that chase you, and each one has a slight different personality. The personality is just expressed in terms of how they track the player's movement, but arguably, first rule-based non-player character, essentially an AI. Moving forward a little bit, I'm a big fan of the Commodore 64 as well as the Spectrum. The Commodore 64, David Crane from Activision, who is famous for Pitfall, also created this game, which is less well known. This is Little Computer People, which was created in 1987. And LCP was a sort of like an early version of a Tamagotchi. You had a game where you had a single player, a single character, an AI character that you controlled. You could do things like instruct it to go to bed and wake up and eat and things like that. And essentially you nurtured the health of this little character, and it had an AI behind it. So a nice early example in the home computer era of the 80s. That was in 1987. This is, for those of you who are gamers, you might recognize Black and White from Lionhead, who are a UK company created by Peter Molyneux. Now, this was an example of a game, a sort of a God sim game, where you were trying to essentially evolve society forward, and at your disposal was this large creature you see in the background. The large creature essentially learned to do your bidding and could become good or evil, thus the Black and White name of the game, based on how you incentivized it. And what was behind that creature was the first example of reinforcement learning in computer games, at least the first recorded example. And reinforcement learning is now very much part of the fabric of AI as we use in different parts of our business. Nice example. And then the last example is the AI director in Left 4 Dead, which is a title from Valve. And this really brought to the gaming community the idea of an adaptive game, a game that's trying to invoke a sense of tension, an emotional response from you, and so it's messing with you as the game is progressing. The AI director decides exactly how many enemies to keep pushing towards you. It decides exactly how your sort of cooperative players who are working with you and controlled by AIs behave to try and create this tension. So they keep passing waves of enemies towards you until you just about run out of bullets, and only then do they stop. So you always get that sense of tension no matter how good you are at playing the game. So again, AI embedded in a game. Now, AI has clearly gone through some amazing transformations in the last while with all the generative AI, large language models, and you heard from Fergal just before this on how Intercom are using LLMs for Fin. This is going to have a big impact on gaming, and I'm going to say it's going to have a big impact on gaming. At the moment, most of the game industry is trying to figure this out. We're trying to figure out how can we engage with things like generative content. How can we do that in a safe way and in a way that's respectful of ownership and copyright? And I think there are a lot of questions still to be answered there before companies like King can truly engage with that. But there's some really nice examples in the literature, and this is a paper from Stanford from last year, which showed sort of the art of the possible. Imagine taking something like ChatGPT, which you can have a perfectly valid conversation with, but you probably know with a bit of prompting, you can get it to have a persona. So for example, if we attached an instance of ChatGPT to the non-player characters in a game, and this is a sort of a Zelda-like Sims game, each of these characters has its own ChatGPT instance. That's essentially making it decide what to do next. and you give each character a different personality and a context and a set of goals, and then you stand back and watch it play forward, and it's really quite interesting. It turned out to be quite boring in the end, but it's really interesting, and it's worth having a look because this is available online, and you can tweak the personalities of the agents just to see how it progresses forward. So for us, we're very excited about this. There's a huge amount of potential offered by generative AI generally, from enhancing game features to enhancing how we produce our games itself, to how we think about software development. And this is the thing I'm very excited about, just the art of writing software. And finally, as a general cognitive productivity aid, not saying anything here that people aren't, I'd say, fully aware of, but just having a look at, for us, what's important. I think we don't think for our types of games that this is going to have a huge impact on our game features, but it's certainly going to impact how we produce our games, how we test our games, and how we operate them live. There's no question that software development is changing, and we're looking to embrace that, and we've run pilots that show and match some of the industry stats out there about productivity enhancements using generative AI or using large language models to aid in the coding process. But this is the area I think we're most excited about. Can we connect this sort of productivity tool, this cognitive enhancement agent, into how every craft at King does its business? And we're running that sort of experiment at large in King right now. So we've had a long journey of AI evolution in King, starting from 2016 when we started to look at the challenge of creating levels, because increasingly that was becoming our bottleneck. And we sort of, through the years, have been increasingly looking at different areas like personalization and recommendation engines. And then around about 2020, we published an AI strategy. In 22, we made an acquisition to accelerate our work in this. And right now, we're in the middle of A, looking at how we use traditional AI techniques to improve our business, and B, looking at what does this explosion of new capability and technology mean for us in the next 3 to 5 years. I'm going to give you 3 use cases just to give you a sense for how we're using maybe more traditional AI. We're not going to talk about large language models here because we're still very early in examining that opportunity for us. But there's a whole history of AI that we can take advantage of as well. So here's what we do. This is our business. Now, I don't expect you to... it's actually a bit nonsense as well, but it just gives you a sense of complexity. A game like Candy Crush, or indeed a business like King, in some sense, represents the perfectly observable business model. Because everything is online, we can track everything that our players do. We know when players are spending, we know when players are leaving our games. And so in a sense, it's a complex, highly nonlinear dynamic system. And it's our job as curators of that business to optimize this highly nonlinear dynamic system. And that's sort of how we think about that, but you have to break it down. At the core of our business is the core loop of the player, playing levels, finishing levels, maybe not completing that level, maybe getting frustrated, maybe really feeling like they're making incredible progress. And at different points, as they're doing that level loop, we get to have a conversation with them. We get to invite them to do different things, like, for example, play with their friends, or join a competition, or ... And so we get these points in time, about once every minute or 2 minutes, to have that choice being presented to the player. But there's an overwhelming choice of things that we can do for that player. And the last thing we want to do is get in front of them and remove or introduce friction to how they're playing the game. We want to get out of their way. So increasingly, we're using essentially recommendation technology, which over time learns what different players are trying to achieve and optimizes specifically for those cases. And so essentially, we get away from the tyranny of choice, presenting a player with every option, and we try to hone it so that we get them to fun in a much more efficient way. Now, each time you make that choice, it's not in isolation. It depends on what's happened before, and it certainly will impact what comes after, and this is where it becomes highly nonlinear from a temporal perspective. So not only do we have to think about the choice we make at any given point in time for a player, we have to think about what the sequence of choices that we're making on behalf of the player and how we think about that progression over time. And we're optimizing for time, we're not optimizing for the instant. And so this is a great analog and a great use case for reinforcement learning, where you're essentially evolving and optimizing policies for players over time and adapting to individual player behavior. I mentioned levels are at the core of what we do, and they absolutely are. We generate thousands of levels every year, in fact, tens of thousands in some cases. So our levels are really important for us, and it's important that that's something that we have full control over. Luckily, as a data-driven organization, we have a huge amount of data at our disposal. So we use that data to do two things. One is to feedback and say whether levels are working for us or not. And we look at the number of attempts per success that a player has. We look at the number of shuffles, times when levels haven't been possible to complete. And we use that to feedback to our level designers. And increasingly what we're doing now is we're developing AIs, effectively, that act as players, AI players. Not to beat the players. We don't want to be better than a player. We want to behave like a player. And there's no average player. So we're looking at AIs that behave like different types of players, like a player who's quite happy to pay and is using boosters, and so has a sort of an advantage in terms of their ability to progress quickly through different levels. And so we're optimizing these so that we can provide feedback to our level designers. We build models, we look at all this data, and over time we build a system that allows our level designers to learn very quickly about whether a level is difficult or not, or going to be fun or not. And so as our designers are creating the levels, we're providing immediate and nearly real-time feedback to them to say, that change you're making is going to make the level 10% harder or 10% easier. And that gives our designers huge agency over the sort of experience that they're trying to create. And the third example is performance marketing. Now, you may not be aware, but in the game industry, the mobile game industry, the main business loop is advertising to players to bring them into your game, and then those players spending time with you and either spending directly or watching ads or just contributing to the overall success of the game. And then over time, some of those players, and in fact the majority of those players, will eventually leave and move on to other games, hopefully other King games. But that's a core loop for us that we need to optimize. And this is what it looks like. We work with a lot of partners on the left-hand side through which we advertise. We advertise to our players, particularly on mobile channels, so that we can tell them that, hey, Candy has a new piece of content available or has a new experience, or advertise any of our other games. Those players come into our game via the app stores or by being re-engaged, and then they start playing. And as we advertise to players, we're spending money on the advertising campaign. And imagine we get 1,000 players in from one given campaign. We have to make sure that the amount we spend on that campaign is less than the amount that those players will ultimately pay inside of our game in aggregate, which the formula on the bottom is our recipe for success. We have a return on investment if the lifetime value of the players that we bring into our games is higher than the overall user acquisition cost or UA cost. That's what we're optimizing for, but how can you do that? So you're acquiring a user now for a certain number of dollars. You're doing that on the basis of an expectation of what they're going to do over the next 18 to 24 months. So what you try and do is, in as short a space of time as possible, for a group of players, you try and predict what's that lifetime value going to look like, and that's exactly what we do over on the right-hand side. So we make a prediction, and if that prediction says, yeah, we think that group of players that we've just brought into the game are going to spend money in time, a lot of them aren't, of course, but many of them will, then this is a good channel for us. This is a good message, this is a good campaign, this is a good partner, and we double down on that. So getting that decision window down as small as possible is really important, and that's another area where we spend a lot of time in our AI to optimize that LTV predictions. Oh, I should have clicked through to predict, and it loops around. How do we go about doing all this? So a lot of examples and just sort of maybe abstraction about how AI might be used, but bringing AI into your business is really hard, particularly, I would say, for businesses that have adopted a very specific way of working. And King has really a very excellent way of working, very data-driven, but then you're trying to think how to alter that way of working to take more advantage of automation and automated decision-making. And this is a survey from IBM from a couple of years ago. What are the classic impediments to bringing AI into your business? Data is the top one. That wasn't our problem, but some of the other problems definitely were reflected. And here's some specifics of King. So that the initial state when we started doing this, we had a very mature data infrastructure, but the actual AI implementation tended to be sporadic and in different pockets. There was no single path. So actually getting AI into production and getting to the point where it was generating value are all sort of special projects, essentially, all individual use cases. No clear ownership or governance, and particularly as you start to leverage more and more of this technology, you have to have a way to govern it inside of your business. And I suppose there was a limited number of applications of AI and machine learning, and what we wanted to do was just to ramp it up completely. We also recognize that one of the restrictions on doing that is just access to talent, and getting people who are experienced in AI and machine learning is an incredibly competitive exercise right now. So we made the decision that we would acquire to try and help us with that. We acquired a company in Sweden called Peltarian, who were experts on deploying AI and machine learning technology into large enterprise. That immediately gave us an injection of 45 people who had experience in doing exactly these sorts of things. And then we started doing exactly what companies like us should be doing, is thinking about how do we land this capability inside of our organization. You don't just sort of open a web page internally and say, here's the AI, come and get it and make your business better. You have to really be thoughtful about infiltrating your business and essentially disrupting the current way of working. So to do that, we created an AI Center of Excellence. We have a team that's focused specifically on working with all the different business units in King to identify opportunities. To date, we've identified over 100 different use cases that we think could have $1 million plus impacts on the business. We need to create awareness for what's happening in the AI space in general and awareness around how different crafts might take advantage of AI. So we created our AI enablement team, which is essentially training. So we're training our executives, we're training our data engineers, we're training our data scientists in the latest technologies that are available. And you can imagine that's getting pretty busy lately with all the stuff that's happening in generative AI and large language models. And finally, we are also investing in our labs, looking forward. What are the things coming down the line that are going to impact our business and enable us into the future? We're at a point, I think, on an AI maturity adoption curve that's very classic in a sense. And just nearly to finish off, I'd say, you start off essentially with experimentation, trying to figure out what's the art of the possible, learning and seeing what's out there and what might hit your business. Then I think you start to do things like we're doing right now, build up an internal consulting organization to essentially aid each of the business units in thinking about how to use AI, provide professional services internally, essentially, and start identifying a couple of use cases where you can show early value. Then you get to the next phase where you're trying to get repeatability in that, and you look at use cases that maybe if we just build an entire team at this, it's always going to generate sort of evergreen value for our business. And a good example for that might be our level creation. So we have a team that we're spinning up specifically around AI for level creation. Then the next phase, and this is probably where we are in our maturity journey, the next phase is where you start connecting the dots of all these systems. You start having AI as nearly a default case in all the different planning things that you're doing, and sort of connecting the dots into a single fabric with AI enabling every part of the business. And finally, you get to maturity, where every time you're thinking about something in a business, AI is one of the first things you think about. I'd say we're at that level in data maturity. We're an incredibly data mature organization, and now we want to catch up and get to that point in the AI side. I'm going to leave us with some sort of lessons, the warts and all, because it's not nearly as fun and easy as these sort of colorful slides generally suggest that life might be. And anybody who's worked in large companies knows there are frictions. Essentially, trying to make change is an antibody for the organism. So here are a couple of observations. First is there's huge power if you can get the company to coalesce around a single objective and a set of key results that enable this to happen, because it cuts through a lot of the decisions that need to happen in your business. So we have this year an objective at a King company level to try and drive AI in our business, and that objective has real revenue numbers attached to it, which is great, because at any given point in time there's always friction, because you have teams who are doing what they do, generating a huge amount of revenue, being really profitable, and you're trying to tell them, let's do something else. And that something else might not necessarily be more revenue generating this year, but it might be something that in next year and the year after is going to be hugely impactful for us. So you have to be able to have those conversations. When you're having those conversations, having a common language for value is incredibly important, particularly the larger the enterprise is. And your ally in this is the finance team. And that's, for people who maybe aren't in large organizations, that seems a bit strange. Finance essentially becomes your United Nations. So the teams that will define what the value to King will be, they are responsible for financial reporting. They're responsible for reporting in a very structured way. And so when we think and make a projection that intervention X is going to have dollar value Y, it's finance who say, yeah, we think we believe you. And that sort of cuts through a whole ton of arguments. It also cuts through some of the hacking that happens in large organizations where people project huge value just so that they get the attention of a central sort of capability team. This just nullifies all that and makes everything very clear. Aligning the middle is hard. Do you know what? It's actually fairly straightforward to get the executives in your organization to think, this is exciting. Great, AI is the next big thing. Definitely, that's going to be in our strategy. In every bullet point, in every report we gave, AI is important for us. Fantastic. When you talk down at the individual level, the individual contributor level, to the engineers who are doing this work, they're completely bought in. The hard yards are in the middle, the sort of middle tier of, let's say, management, product managers, product owners, where you're trying to essentially disrupt and compete with the alignments and with the incentive structures that they have to deliver on a day-to-day basis. Let me tell you, that's super hard. And finally, just using ML and AI to do things like make great predictions and lifetime value predictions, that's great, but that's only the first step. And really what you do with that, the treatment and how you deal with balancing your business and optimizing that nonlinear dynamic system using these new tools is still very hard. And I am going to call it a day there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. So, Stephen, you talked about kind of the messy middle there as well, but just a question from myself is, what was the most unexpected challenge your team faced when putting all this together?
The most unexpected challenge?
Yeah, the most unexpected. So I'm saying something very general and you say something very specific.
I would say that when you talk to teams and you're trying to talk about the art of the possible, that idea of teams hacking the system is really difficult, because I might talk to a team who are responsible for a certain part of our business and they'll say, if we can get these people to generate AI solutions, we think we can generate $200 million of additional revenue next year. And the chances are maybe they could, all right? But with finance being in place and with them then having to put that into their projection that they are then bonused on at the end of the year, it sort of cuts. So I was surprised at the level of excitement people have, but also the level of over-optimism they have and the degree to which they're prepared to say things are going to be worth way more just so that they can get the attention on their team.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Okay, we'll go to the questions from the audience. What does your product team do to combat addiction? How do you balance this while also optimizing for profit? The resemblance of slot machine design is hard to ignore.
Great question. And for us, the fundamental premise is the game is free to play. So we absolutely make sure that the experience for people who aren't paying anything and aren't watching ads is still a great experience. And we don't have a business if players are not feeling fully engaged and having a lot of fun. And we have lots of systems in place to ensure that that's the case. And we've also got this amazing community of players. Millions of our players are in this community sharing ideas and sort of self-helping as well. And if we ever see that a player is having trouble, we take action.
Okay. Do you believe that AI can replicate the human ability when it comes to finding the fun, which is very nebulous but core to the game dev?
Very tough. I don't know, and we're still experimenting with that. Finding fun, in a sense, for us is finding that balance of level difficulty is at the core of our business, right? And so that's why we're investing in creating different AI players who are playing the levels in advance. And so they allow us to test before we release into the audience. And we still have the idea that we have a single progression for all of our players. Everyone experiences the same candy. It's not as if we, optimize level 500 for different types of players. We don't. You get one game, one set of levels for our players. But we're trying to figure out the right journey and the right sort of ramp, a roller coaster ride, effectively, so that people get that fun, get that sense of achievement, and then that sense maybe of not achievement, so that it's not just all a high. So that for us is tricky. Finding fun and defining fun is really, really hard. And how we correlate fun, which we do actually talk to our players, believe me, and we try to understand what are they finding fun, and then we look for correlates on our quantitative side. So you're looking for those intersections of qualitative and quantitative. And it's not easy, but I think we certainly have a lot of signals that we can use to say players are having fun in this area, and then we use that to test and to optimize as we go forward.
Okay, and do employees feel threatened by the increased productivity that, the AI represents?
Isn't that interesting? I mean, the entire industry is thinking about that. Everybody who's, like me, let's call it generally a knowledge worker, is thinking, what does this mean? And I would say everybody should be absolutely engaging with how these technologies are going to help me in my role, and I need to learn how that role is going to change. It is going to change. I don't think we have a degree of anxiety about this in our organization. I'd say it's more excitement. And we've been running internal pilots with hundreds of our King teams in somewhat controlled environments where we look at what does a finance team do when they have a capability like GPT-4 at their disposal? What do our software engineers do? And I'll tell you, everybody that gets engaged in those pilots, when we survey afterwards, do you want to continue to learn and engage with this tool? We have 100% unanimity that they do. And I think that's the challenge for us. Everybody just needs to think about what this means for you and your craft and expect that there's a high likelihood that if you're working in an industry like the software industry, yet your role is going to change over the next couple of years as these technologies come to bear.
Absolutely. And do you test every new level with users? Is game user testing different from standard testing?
Well, yes, we test every new level with users because we release to those users and then we watch like a hawk whether those levels are working. We have A/B testing infrastructure as well that we rely very heavily on. So even though we might run through with AI players first to test for a level of quality, at the end of the day when we're releasing levels, we're also looking for the signals from the players. We're constantly looking at that and determining, is this more fun, is this less fun, is this causing too much frustration, is it too easy? And we use the data from the A/B tests to essentially decide whether we need to make a fix and go back to the drawing board. So yeah, it's a combination of both.
Okay. Is there a risk of AI making young users spend every time more money on microtransactions when they play to win, and this becomes then a source of gamification?
We don't have a pay-to-win mechanic at all because, again, you can completely... there's no situation where you're winning and someone is losing on the basis of you paying. What we have is people who pay in order to progress a little bit faster. And just some people like doing that, and that's fine. I'm personally someone who doesn't, and I just like trying to solve the puzzle. So we're trying to fine-tune our game for all those different sorts of players. And our games are available for people in the 18-plus category. We're targeting adults. We're not targeting children at all. And in fact, in jurisdictions where that's the case, they're prohibited from playing the game, and we certainly support that.
Okay, and what's stopping you from letting AI design all your levels?
I think it's a long way off AI doing that. We've got really incredible AI level designers who've been, they're just so great at their craft. What we see these techniques doing is just allowing them to be more productive. We'd love to be generating more levels. We'd love to be generating more surprising and sophisticated levels. And we're investing really heavily in the tools that we have for level design and really enabling those level designers to do more with the time they have available to them. And they love this. But when this is realized, you have a level designer making a choice to change the color of a single block in a tile in a canvas of the level in the puzzle, and the AI system is saying that might make it 10% harder. That's the sort of interaction we have, and that AI is doing that on the basis of a number of different types of players. So we still need our level designer to use their creativity to design a level in a specific way, and I think we're a long way off anything being more automated than that.
Okay, and we'll go with the final question now. In mobile speed, etc., loading and all that, is there something with regards to the app sizes and stability, etc.? Is AI actually going to start clogging things up?
It's a great question. And the size of the download and the time it takes to load your game and get to the point where you're playing correlate directly with retention in your applications, running at the scale that King operates at. So we obsess about this stuff. This is not an issue for us right now. We don't have AIs embedded in our client. We're using AI as part of how we produce our game, how we test our content, how we do software development, how we assess the data that's coming back into our systems and generate insights from that. So there's no question that we're putting a big ChatGPT model into the game client. That's not what we're doing at all.
Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Stephen Collins.
Indeed.